Let's dive into Obsidian for survey research. So I'm using Qualtrics right now because I have it through my university. And what you're looking at right here is a bunch of the survey responses that came through. And I set it up so that each survey, when it comes through, I see a random ID and a response ID. And then I move this information into Obsidian so I can do all my data analysis in Obsidian. I'm going to take you through all the different processes for managing the survey data, including additional applications to make this a very smooth process, and this is really important when you're working with a lot of data. First thing I do is I set up a specific folder for the research project. So if you look at my vault here, I have a research folder. In my research folder, I have a set of other folders for my research project. So here's this research project. And then in that folder, I have more folders for the different kinds of either data or aspects of the research project that I'm working on. So what we're going to be looking at today are the curriculum perspective survey responses by participant. And so if I open this up, you'll see a whole bunch of files. Each file is a different survey response. So what I'm going to show you right now is how I take an individual survey response from Qualtrics and put it into Obsidian to get it ready for data analysis. And first I'll show you how I go about doing that and how it works really quickly. And then if you continue watching, I will break down the whole process of how I set this all up to make it work so seamlessly. So the first thing I do when I come in is I figure out what's my most recent response that I put in, because I'm often inputting all of these over a series of weeks because it takes a long time. So for instance, the latest response was this one that's with 74544, which is the random ID. So I'm going to go up here and I see this is the last one. So that means I'm now going to scroll up to get to the next response. And here's what I do. I highlight over, I copy it. I come over here and I press a hotkey. For me, it's going to be Control Option 9 and watch what happens. It's sort of like magic and amazing. And then I come over here. I'm going to put a paste, and it pastes in that information. And again, I'm going to explain how this is all working in a moment. Then for response ID, I'm going to go back over here. I'm going to use another little app. Highlight that. Bring it in here for response ID. And I just double check, when did this response come in? This came in April 16th. So I'm going to go over here for date submitted. April 16th. And then the data type is survey response. So that all gives me some initial information. And then the next thing I do is I go into Qualtrics, and I'm actually going to export to PDF the survey response from Qualtrics. The reason for this is because once I have all the data in Obsidian, I don't necessarily want to go back and work with Qualtrics again. And for folks who are using specific aspects of Qualtrics for data analysis, you could go ahead and do that. I'm actually using Obsidian for all my data analysis because this is more oriented towards qualitative research. Okay, so now I know that my file downloaded. I'm going to go into my files here, and now I'm going to drag it, the PDF, right into this file. And then the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to click on it. I'm going to rename it. Another hotkey, hit save. And now I'm all ready to work on analysis. I have this individual response in here. The next thing that I actually do is I go into, because this person said yes to these two things, I actually would need to, from a project management standpoint, include the information of who that person is and what the status is of me contacting them for a response. And I do that actually all in Airtable. I might show another video if people are interested in how I do that. But right now I'm just focusing on how did I make that so seamless to get all that information in here, and how do I set this up in Obsidian to make it very easy to do the analysis? So let's go through all of the steps right now of how I set up my project with all those apps in between to make it super quick to get responses in here and set them up for data analysis. Step one, the first thing that is important is having a template. The reason I want a template is because I want to keep track of all the different information related to this file that's now specific to this survey set of responses. So if I were to go through this PDF of 14 pages, it would have all the data from the person's survey responses. Again, a lot of it is qualitative in nature. So these are the properties, and the properties are in a template. So if I were to go into my templates folder, you'll see here I have research project templates, and then I have an imagining possibilities research template, which is the one that we're looking at here. And a couple of things that I do is I have it automatically use these tags. This is the name of the research project. I don't have an alias automatically. And then I have a type of file. This is research. So every time the template gets used, it's going to have that information in there. It has the research project here. And notice that the research project property goes to an MOC, or a map of content, specifically for the research project. And every time I have a new file in the survey responses, I'll go back so that I could show you what I'm talking about here. So if I go into research, all of these, every time there's a new file, because it has this MOC link in here, it keeps adding these as linked files in there. So for instance, if I go to the MOC and I go down here, you'll see all of these survey responses. When I do the data analysis, it will make a lot of sense. Going back to the template, I have other parts of the template, such as concepts. This is pretty standard in most of the notes that I work on. I don't usually use these so much for research projects, but they're there just in case I want to connect it to concepts that I use throughout my vault and on research projects. Status, right now, the status for any of these surveys, it doesn't say anything on it because I have not started to actually process or work through the data. So right now it's just empty. I probably could have a status that's like waiting for analysis, but I just haven't started the analysis. This is all just setting up and managing the data. I have a next step, date submitted. I showed you a moment ago that makes it easy to track when the survey was submitted. And then the random ID and response ID helps me keep track of each survey response. So all the data is connected to this particular ID, because you'll notice that the only place where a possible name would show up here is in that PDF file only if the participant wants a follow-up and provided their name. Otherwise, there are no names because it's an anonymous survey. So the way to track all the information to make sure I can follow this same person responded with this response and this response and this response. Once those responses are sort of scattered all over my analysis files, which I'll show you later, I can always have it connected back to the random ID. And then the response ID I have is just a second layer of being able to keep track of everything in Qualtrics. So I think templates are really important for any kinds of research that you're doing in Obsidian, because if you're like me, when you do your research, you just have massive amounts of data, and you want to be able to keep track of it. And having all the properties here in the top of your file really helps towards managing that data. So that's the first thing, is having a template available. Okay, so how did I set up my computer to have that seamless sort of ability to create a file, input a bunch of information into it very easily, just from kind of highlighting over the random ID number? Okay, so one of the things that I am working with in relationship to Obsidian is the program called Keyboard Maestro. And with Keyboard Maestro, I have a macro that I created to help me move things faster. If you've never used Keyboard Maestro before, it's the type of program where it lets you create these really useful macros, they're called, but they're like series of actions that can occur on your computer with just like a hotkey or by like typing something out. So this is not going to go into how to use Keyboard Maestro. There are tons of YouTube videos and resources available for you on doing that. What I am going to show you is how I set up the Keyboard Maestro for this specific macro that lets me have like this sort of seamless inputting of survey response entries into Obsidian instead of having to like manually open up a lot of windows and tabs and things of that sort. So the first thing to note is that I have this set up so that it's a hotkey, like I said, Control Option 9. When I press that, what Keyboard Maestro is going to do is it's going to type Command N. And when you're in Obsidian and you press Command N, it creates a new tab. So instead of me having to do a new tab on my own, this macro does that for me automatically. And then after that, it pauses for 0.5 seconds and then types in this keystroke, which is Command Option 0. Now, what does Command Option 0 do? Command Option 0 is actually another hotkey in Obsidian. So if I go into my hotkeys, you'll notice that in my templater, Command Option 0 is a hotkey for templater to use that research template that I just showed you a moment ago. So the macro, what it's doing for me in Keyboard Maestro is first it's opening up a new tab, then it's waiting 0.5 seconds, and then it is opening this templater to insert this specific template. Again, it's just skipping steps for me to have to do manually. It just does them for me automatically. After that, the next thing that Keyboard Maestro does is it inserts text by pasting curriculum survey response dash 2024 dash whatever's on the system clipboard. And so that is where when I go over the random ID and copy, it's now in the system clipboard, so that when I run this macro, it takes this part of the title here and then adds on whatever is in the clipboard, which is that random ID. And then it pauses for 5 seconds and then hits return as the keystroke. So that's what allows me to, let me do it without the Keyboard Maestro. So I would do a Command N, and then I would need to open up my command palette and find templater, and then insert a template, and then choose the correct template. Is that even it? Can't even remember sometimes. This is like already taking me a while to remember which one to use. Here it is, the research template. And now I've done that. And then I had to go in and make the title work. So now I had to go up here and title it. And I would type it out and put it. It just saves me all that time. So instead of having to type all that all manually and go through that process, I just go in here again. I'm copying it. I'm coming in here. I'm doing Command Option 9. And it puts it all in there for me. Here, it's warning me, oh yeah, you already have a file with that same name. So I'm just going to delete this file. But it's sort of beautiful. It just reduces friction. So that's the first couple of steps. Before, I showed you how I just pasted that random ID, and that's because the clipboard, when it puts the title in here, it's in the clipboard so that now when I do the random ID, if I were to do the paste here, it just has that whole title, and I don't need that in there. I just want the ID, so I just delete it. That Keyboard Maestro macro saves me a lot of extra steps. You are not going to necessarily want my Keyboard Maestro macro. You would want to create your own, or in Obsidian what you could do is you could set up a series of hotkeys, but I wanted it to all go like that just by doing Command Option 9 and having that set up for me. The reason why I put the PDF file in here is because I want to have it available, and then I can scroll down and have all my answers in there. So now, what's the next step? As you can see, like I have many hundreds of survey responses. So one of the things I want to be able to do is to keep track of which survey responses did I work through the data and import it into Obsidian, and which survey responses are sort of waiting. Now, I could use status for this, as I mentioned before, but I like to have icons to make it very easy to look across. So the way that I do that is I'm using a plugin called Iconize, or Iconize. I don't know how to pronounce it correctly. What Iconize lets me do is I can go in here. If you haven't ever experienced this before, when you're working with a lot of data and a lot of responses, it's easy to lose track over like what's the last thing that I did. So I use these icons to signal to me, oh, here's a part where you stopped last time so that you can continue on next time. For instance, the last time that I had inputted before today was this 27966 random ID number. And you'll notice here that I have a little pause icon right there because I paused there when I was working with it. Now that I have added 90941, if I was finished with that, what I would do is I would change 27966. I would change this from, I'm going to go over to change icon. I would change it from pause to this raised hand just to say, hey, I'm ready for you to do something with me. I'm ready for you to input the data. And then I would go over to, in this case, 74544, which is one of the ones that I just added recently to show you how this works. And you'll notice there's no icon there. And I would say, hey, change the icon. I want this to be paused. This is where I'm leaving off. Now I know which were the files that I left off of. Now, actually, because I'm using Airtable in conjunction with this, I'm actually going to go through, and before I move on, I'm going to go into Airtable and input the information I need to contact those folks and to keep track of that. But there was another part of this process that I wanted to show you. So you'll see here, there is another icon, and that icon is with this sort of pause with a circle around it. And if I were to open that, this is a little bit different, this file, because you'll notice that here I actually have the data included in the file itself. And so now what we're looking at is the actual data that I copied and pasted from Qualtrics into this Obsidian file. So here's a question from the research study, and then here's the person's response right in here. So all of the responses are included in this file, both in the form of the PDF file from Qualtrics, and then also as text in the Obsidian file. And the reason for that, again, this is still just management. I'm not doing analysis yet. It's because as I go through and start to analyze the data, I want to be able to go back, just like how I would go back to like a literature note. I want to be able to go back to this specific entry, this file, so I know that all of the data came from here. And so what I would do is I would copy, let's say, from question 24, I would copy this and then paste it into a file that is specific for this question. And you'll notice here, the way that I set up my folders, I have a folder that is responses by participant, but then I have another folder that is questions. And you'll see here that there's a file that's just for curriculum definition data. And if I were to go in here, I have all the responses of the ones that I put in there before. And check this out. After each response, I have the link that goes back to that file that we were just looking at, that file that would be this type of file. So I can go back and forth between the data from any particular participant and that participant's, all of that person's responses. And it's organized by question. Each of these is a question that there was a survey response for. When I'm done with that process, that's when I will start to make sense and cluster ideas and grab ideas. That's a whole other video of how I analyze that data. But you'll notice that going back to the icons for the responses, I can keep track of which survey responses I have actually put into an Obsidian file. So you'll see here, and however many that is, those are the only ones where I've actually gone through and started to take the data from the original Qualtrics form and put them into Obsidian. So that's the next step that I would need to do, is I need to go through each of these, and I would need to take the data and put it into the Obsidian file. But that's how I'm managing all of this data, all of these responses, and it helps me keep track of the whole process. It helps me know, where am I in the process? Okay, I still need to take these responses. I need to put these responses into Obsidian, and then I know which of these files do I have the data not only in PDF form, but in text form, so that I can go through and I can start to analyze the data. And then later on in the process, I can start to come up with themes and all that really interesting work that is sort of like the crux of analyzing data. So highly recommend Obsidian for managing research. Hope this is helpful to you. If you have any questions, let me know. Have a good one. Bye.